Susan Corbett, custom quilter. I just finished my quilt and I thought I would tell you about it instead of just typing in a whole bunch of words. So I got the idea for this quilt about, I don't know, 10 or 11 years ago. It's sort of a reproduction of a quilt I found in a date book, a little quilt calendar from a long time ago. And I just hauled off and made it. There was no pattern to follow. I started just cutting up fabric and making little half square triangles, and it just sort of evolved. Here in these little corner spaces, the original quilt had little tiny star blocks. And I ended up going with this kind of applique because I got the dimensions all wrong and ended up with this really big space in here between the feathered star and the blocks. So I just got some fabric and cut it up and began playing with it, and that's how that came together. And then I thought, let's just do some more of that Rotary purse applique in those little corner squares so that it would integrate that throughout the quilt. My favorite kinds of quilts are mixed techniques where you've got all kinds of different things happening there. So I'm just in love with it. I think it's just wonderful. This is a quilt I've always wanted to have. In retrospect, well, if I were going to do it all over again, I'd be a lot more careful and precise with it. No two blocks ended up being the same size at all. So this was a machine quilter's nightmare, which I think is pretty ironic. So not being flat, I had to employ all my experience, and I've got plenty of it. In 22 years of machine quilting, I've met more than my share of quilts that are not flat. So to begin quilting it, which is the point of all this, first you stabilize, and that means ditch quilting right in between all your major blocks and around piecing lines. And that also means quilting around the applique, around my center block. So that's job one, and that was a big job because it was so unflat. So I ended up doing a lot more stabilizing than I thought I was going to get it to be in any kind of shape that was going to cooperate. I did lots of pinning, easing. It was pretty tricky, and so all those flaws are in the quilt. If your quilt is poorly pieced to begin with, there's a little bit I can do to mitigate that, but not enough, you know. So this quilt has a whole bunch of flaws, but I don't think they take away from the overall striking, beautiful end result. I'm still pretty happy with it. All right, so after stabilizing, then I went after all these feathers because there's so much white space in here, which is one of the reasons I was drawn to making this quilt in the first place. All those big empty areas for all kinds of yummy quilting. It's traditional, so I went with feathers. The original had feathers everywhere. And of course I had to tweak it and do it all a little bit differently, so you can see, well, I hope you can see, it's a directional quilt for various reasons. So I started in the middle and quilted in a leaf, and then took off with the feathers from there. And they, they're not all perfectly the same, because that would bore me to death. I would hate that. So I just did whatever I felt like doing all around. And that took a really long time to do. I had originally planned on, you know, when it got to the background quilting, to extend the little dense quilting into these spaces here. But when I saw how much work that was going to entail, I decided just to continuous curve those triangles, and I'm happy with that decision. After I did all the feathers, then I went in and did straight lines. You can sort of see, so they're just concentric triangles in each of those blocks. I did quite a few thread changes, but I think in the end they look like they're all one color thread. Then I moved on to all the motifs here surrounding the feathered star. So it's all just roses, all different kinds of roses. That was a lot of fun. So roses and leaves. Because the backgrounds are all different, you can see some more prominently than others, but I think that makes it interesting. I think that's gorgeous. Okay, now a word about the Rotary purse applique. What that is okay, starting with the fabric for the feathered star, I acquired a whole bunch more of that same line. It's a bunch of different fabrics, but most of it is Moda. And you know how Moda goes with Moda. So, like the roses in here are the roses in here as well. So what I did was, I didn't cut out each little individual flower. I'm cutting out sections of fabric. And this part here is probably 3 or 4 pieces of fabric. And one goes on top of the other one, and so they look like it's all one thing, but they're not. I was trying to show a client what was going on here, and she didn't see it at all. So I'm trying to see how, okay, I think this part will illustrated better than all the rest of them. You see, first of all, the difference in the background fabric colors. So you can see that edge. That's where I cut around the fabric. So the edge, you know, and I folded it under, so that's right there. And this was my first attempt at doing Rotary purse applique. I would do it a little bit differently. I think I'd be a lot more meticulous about avoiding like that line right there. I think I would have cut all that out. It just depends on how much work you want to do. So this is a mix of 2 different lines. I think this is Hollywood and Vine, and I don't know what that is, but I liked them together, and I just played with it until I found a arrangement that I thought would work well. So when you go to quilt Rotary purse applique, you want to treat all the background as all one background. And every time I make a quilt, I learn a whole bunch of new things. And what I learned on this one is cut the back of the, like it's fabric on top of fabric, on top of batting and backing. And that's a lot of thicknesses. So I would cut out the fabric underneath all this to make it not so thick and stiff. I'm in the process now of blocking this quilt. You know, I washed it and laid it flat to dry, but it's kind of lumpy and bumpy, and I'm still trying to get it to be as flat as possible. And so these areas where there's different thicknesses of layers of fabric. That's what's giving me some trouble. Okay, so I did the feathers and all the straight lines and then put all these roses in here, and then I was left to go for all that little background stuff. Well, I outlined the bird in the center, did some continuous curve and some straight lines in the feathered star itself, because that's about all it needs. And then I did a fair amount of stippling, as small as I could, because I wanted the area around the roses to look like space. I did not want a recognizable design in there that would detract. And then in the backgrounds, okay, one of the challenges was where the feathers meet those cornerstones. Because around the feathers, I was doing this little, it's not McTavishing exactly, it's a type of echo. And then I was just making it up as I went along. So, you know, I put some other little elements in there and just tried to get them to flow one into the other. And I don't know how to tell you how to do that, except to say that it's an intuitive thing. From one day to the next, I might have an idea that I like today and don't like tomorrow, or something else will occur to me, you know, and then I would throw in a leaf or something. And there we are. It took a long time. I mean, all of this quilt was just a long time in the making. So it's got very, very, very many mistakes, but I'm amazed at how gorgeous it looks regardless.